Hi everyone, I am Gracie and welcome to another episode of Arsenia Creates. I know summer is over, but I can't resist making this tunic top. I have used the sewing pattern from Newlook K6575, and this one behind me is the version A. So if you'd like to know how to make this top, just keep watching this video. But before we start, please don't forget to click subscribe on this channel, Arsenia Creates.
For the materials, we will need a lightweight woven fabric. For this video, I have chosen this animal print georgette fabric. We will also need a fusible interfacing, three-fourths yard of 3/8 inch or 9mm wide elastic, a matching thread, and our sewing pattern from Newlook K6575 that we will follow on this video. As I've said on my previous videos, I don't cut my sewing patterns. Instead, I use a tracing paper. I made sure that I transferred all the markings on the paper and of course on my fabric. Stay stitch the body's front and sleeve from each end, meeting at the center. This will prevent your fabric from stretching. And for the back and sleeve section, stay stitch along the curve of the neckline, starting from the shoulder edge going to the center back seam. We will use a long straight stitch for this. Stitch center back seam of body section. Whenever I use this type of fabric, I always use a French seam, but if you prefer, you can just do an ordinary straight stitch, then overlock to edge finish it. And if you don't have the machine, you can use a seam binding or zigzag stitch to achieve a neat edge finish. For the next step, we will stitch body's front to body's back at shoulder seams. Following the manufacturer's directions, apply the fusible interfacing to front neck and back neckband sections. Stitch shoulder seams of neckband sections. Then we will trim it and press open. Carefully clip along the curves of the front and upper edges of tunic, making sure not to snip the stay stitching. With the right sides together, pin neckband to tunic, matching centers back and shoulder seams, spreading clips along edge of tunic to conform to the shape of neckband. Then stitch it with 5/8 inch or 1.5 cm seam allowance. and then layer the seam afterwards. Press band out, pressing seam toward the band. The outside of the band will be flat along the seam by this time. Stitch center front seam of front neckband sections together from lower edge to large dot, back stitching at large dot to reinforce seam. Stitch center front seam of front neckband facing sections from lower edge to large dot, back stitching at large dot to reinforce seam. Stitch front neckband facings to back neckband facing at shoulder seams. To neaten our notched edge, we could use an overlocker, or if you don't have the machine, just do a zigzag stitch. With the right sides together, pin facing to neckband, matching centers back, shoulder seams, and large dots. Using 5/8 inch or 1.5 cm seam allowance, stitch front and neck edges between large dots, back stitching at large dots to reinforce seam. Then carefully layer the seam. The next step is to understitch the neckband facing. And to do this, we will have to trim the seam just a tiny bit more than the layer that we made earlier. Then carefully snip the curved areas of the neckband facing. On the outside, we will stitch closest to the seam, making sure to catch the seam from the inside. To make sure that the seam is folded, you can press it toward the neckband before understitching. As we can see, the seam is now securely folded to the neckband. Turn facing to inside, then press. Pin finished edge of band facing 3/8 inch or 1 cm over seam, placing pin on outside. On outside, stitch in the ditch or groove of neckband seam, or stitch neckband close to seam, catching in finished edge of facing on inside. So right now, I am doing a stitch in the ditch, which means that I will stitch through the seam line from the outside, making sure that the finished edge of the facing is got on the inside. If you noticed that the finished edge of the neckband facing is now stitched to the bodies, yet the stitch line on the outside is not too visible. Pin front and sleeve to back and sleeve at entire underarm seam, matching large dots. Stitch underarm seam starting from lower edge to large dot, back stitching at large dot to reinforce seam. To reinforce curve at underarm, stitch again over first stitching. Then clip the curves. Press under hem allowance of 5/8 inch or 1.5 centimeters on sleeve edge. To form a narrow hem, tuck under raw edge to meet crease and then press. Stitch hem in place, squaring stitching below opening. Apply a piece of fusible interfacing to wrong side of front over each buttonhole area, following manufacturer's directions. Make buttonholes in front at markings. As you noticed, I didn't follow the direction of the markings for the buttonholes. Instead of horizontal, I made vertical buttonholes, but it is up to you whichever way you want it. Stitch the lower front section to the lower back section of a tunic at side seams. With the right sides together, pin front and back to lower edge of bodies, matching centers back, side seams, and large dots. Stitch in a 3/4 inch or 2 cm seam. To do this step, we need to insert the bodies in the front and back section, making sure that it's right sides together. Trim front and back seam allowance only to within 1/4 inch or 6 mm of stitching. For the next step, we will have to press 1/4 inch or 6 mm on the raw edge. Then press the seam down. Now, stitch close to the pressed edge through all the thicknesses. For the drawstring, fold it in half lengthwise with right sides together. Stitch 1/4 inch or 6 mm from fold edge, stretching drawstring while stitching. I am using a loop turner to turn the drawstring right side out. But if you don't have something like this, you can use a hand needle and thread and attach it to one end of drawstring, then draw the needle eye forward through fold, turning the drawstring right side out. Cut a piece of elastic the length of the guide. Pin elastic to raw ends of drawstring overlapping ends 5/8 inch or 1.5 centimeters. Then stitch overlapped ends together securely in place. Tuck in remaining raw end of drawstring and slip stitch closed. Attach a safety pin to one end of drawstring. Insert pin and drawstring through one buttonhole opening in front casing. Work drawstring through entire casing and out through the other buttonhole so that lapped ends are at the side seams. Stitch across casing at the side seams to secure. Allow garment to hang overnight. Mark length, trim depth of hem evenly, allowing 5/8 inch or 1.5 centimeters for hem. Machine base to 5/8 inch or 1.5 centimeters from lower edge. Press up hem along stitching. To form a narrow hem, tuck under raw edge to meet stitching. And then press. And lastly, stitch close to the pressed edge.
And that's how I made this sexy tunic top, following the sewing pattern Newlook K6575. Anyways, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you like it, and I hope you try making this tunic top because it's really nice, especially summertime. If you like this video, please don't forget to click like button, and if you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to subscribe here on Arsenia Creates for more crafting and sewing. See you next time.